Hi, I'm John Atack. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome my good friend Joe Zimhart. Hi, Joe.
Hello, John. Yeah, good to see you again. And it's a pleasure to be here talking with you about simple and abstruse and magnificent things once again.
Yet again. And you're telling me something about retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn and his prayers, and we were wondering whether they're being answered. So tell me a little bit about that. You've posted a video and we'll put a link to that as well. Tell me.
It was one of my more recent YouTubes, and I'm used to getting 100, maybe 200 hits on my best efforts, because I don't really advertise this stuff. It's more for personal use and people I know. But this particular video was called "The Power of Prayer." Lieutenant Flynn's invocation and the great invocation of Alice A. Bailey, who's a theosophist, and I commented on that type of prayer, use of prayer. And my comment basically goes back to my cut, or Church Universal and Triumphant days, when the Church Universal, along with a lot of fundamentalist name it, claim it Christians, used the old King James translation of the Bible only. That was their main tool. And the whole name it and claim it cult of Christianity uses that Bible too. The old King James is the go-to thing for fundamentalist evangelicals. They, I think, believed it dropped out of heaven in English, and
I think it was William Tyndale, and then the group of bishops, the Bishop's Bible, and then James the First people who caught it.
Yes, they did, and James guided it into being, I think. I mean, it's I don't mean to put it down in any sense, because it was quite a way to enhance the English language. It codified a lot of things, and it did as much as Shakespeare to bring the English language into some kind of a lingua franca, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think I think it stands alongside Shakespeare. It's a work of tremendous literary beauty.
However,
it does have some errors in it,
Yeah, there's quite a bit. In fact, when you look at it, like almost any biblical translation, it's the Bible is more like a sieve than a container. It's leaks all over the place when it comes to accuracy and consistency and even morality. You have to really be careful with that document, the way we are with many other scriptures. We can't look at it as inerrant. However, the evangelical community likes to look at the old King James as inerrant, as like Moby Dick. The way it was written is the way you should to look at it. Yeah,
Moby Dick's a great work. And maybe just to give a very simple statement, the King James says, "The voice of the turtle was heard in the land." And the translation should be, "The voice of the turtle dove was heard in the land." It's a simple thing, but it's just to show that we have to be very careful when we're taking something from Hebrew, the one book in Aramaic, and from Greek, that even, the great scholars can go back and find, oh, actually that word doesn't mean turtle, and turtles don't sing, unless, of course, we're talking about the song Happy Together, and those turtles were actually people.
Or a Walt Disney version of a turtle that talks.
Oh, yeah, of course.
You have those, right?
That's what the King James Bible is talking about.
Maybe. So the offending passage here that I was looking at, which was magnified in many of these groups, including the cult I was in, is Isaiah 45:11. And in the King James, it has, I don't have the translation in front of me, but basically, the idea is that God is saying, of the works of my hands and of my sons, you can command ye me, and that's the ending phrase, command ye me. And so that is amplified in these name it, claim it cults as people saying, well, there is scripture that allows us to command God's energy. But when you look at the passage, even in context in King James, it goes on and contradicts that, because God is basically saying that, I'm the potter, you're the pot. How dare you tell the potter, how dare does the pot tell the potter what to do? So even in context, it does explain itself, but in other translations, of course, it doesn't have that command ye me. It's more like a question, how dare you command me? So the crux of this whole thing boils down to this video that was sent to me by a colleague of retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn praying at one of these large churches. I think it was in Nebraska on September 17th, and run and owned by Kenneth Copeland, who is one of the wealthiest American televangelists out there. He's elderly now, but he's still out there pumping the.
Hang on a minute. I thought
flock.
that the King James Bible, Jesus says, "He who would follow me must give all he has to the poor." And this guy Kenneth Copeland hasn't read that bit or didn't understand it.
Well, that's a bit of it. It also says that. God gives you so many talents, and you should go out there and use them and thrive. So it just says a lot of stuff. It's good for capitalism. It's good for communism. Either way.
One side fits all.
So I went into this, based on this General Flynn, this short video clip I got where he's invoking the sevenfold rays and the archangels, and sending them forth to do the bidding of the church and whatever agenda is in the minds of the prayerful flock there. And of course, we know that the agenda of this particular group, with Flynn supporting QAnon at one point, and most of the televangelists supporting Trumpism, is the Trump agenda. So you're using prayer, the power of prayer, the power of God, the power of archangels, the power of the sevenfold rays, to go out there and I kind of boiled it down in my video of God is being treated like a dog. We can flip the word, and you can send it out and bring back the sheep that are strayed for you, or you can send it out to chase away the wolves, the predators, the people that you don't like. And God will do your bidding if you do it with heartfelt prayer, and you bow your head down, and or you might do decrees like with Church Universal and Triumphant, and command through decrees and affirmations and positive thinking and all of that.
An example of a decree that you have used in Church Universal and Triumphant. An
example of a decree?
Yeah.
Oh, they range from something as simple as I am a being of violet fire. I am the purity God desires. And you're supposed to visualize this violet fire pouring through your soul, your body from up above, and cleansing you of all karma and bad energy and anxiety and illness and poverty and whatever the hell else it can do. But in decreeing is rapid mantra chanting, basically. And so in Church Universal and Triumphant, that mantra, I am a being of violet fire, etc., would sound more like I am a being violet fire, and the purity God's and being violet fire, and purity God's and being violet fire, and purity God's, and it's very rapid and it's done in unison, and it sounds like an auctioneer, basically.
So as with any repetition, it would tend to induce an altered state.
Oh yeah, you get a buzz in your head, doing
the visualization
after a few minutes. Yeah. And after about an hour of doing that in a group, you could imagine the kind of the aura, expanded aura you have, and the cleansing feeling you have, and all of that. The idea in Cut was to tithe your time decreeing, which meant to decree 2.4 hours a day. Which is quite a bit, and the more obsessive Cut members would do a lot more than that, and other ones like me did it a few minutes maybe, and figured that was enough. So you could also use blast annihilation decrees. That those words were in there to blast and annihilate the energy of your enemy, and they came from the old I Am cult. Those and Cut would only use them in their inner circle because they were the I Am cult was vilified for using that. They would use blast and annihilation decrees against the Roosevelt administration, for instance, because they hated liberals, back then. And Cut was very right wing also. It voted straight Republican most of the time, or most people. And like I said, they were into the old King James and capitalism, but they also believed in the capitalist communist conspiracy, the deep state, that is out there ruining everything for us, Christed ones, as they called us. So you have a similar inclination among General Flynn and that whole flock of 20% of Americans that think Trump is sent by God, and the rest of the Republicans that go along with it because, why not? It's getting votes, basically. Even though he's a jerk, we like him because he's getting us votes. And so I basically argued that from the point of analysis of Isaiah 45:11, which is mistakenly used by all of these groups, that the whole nature of that kind of prayer comes into question because, one, does it work? And which is from the scientific, pragmatic point of view. Our secular society would look at that. You could take a statue of a saint and bury it in the back of your yard, and hopefully that will cure an illness or help you find your keys that you lost last week, something like that. So that's called sympathetic magic.
Yes.
You do one thing and something else in sympathy acts accordingly. In fact, I think you could look at the whole temple period in Judaism as sympathetic magic. They're taking all these animals, slaughtering them, sacrificing to the deity, hoping that the deity listens and brings them goodwill and whatever it is. So it's an exchange of sympathy, using animals, as your bartering tool, the dead ones, in fact. And and this goes back, of course, Abraham's attempt to sacrifice Isaac was symbolic of human sacrifice, which is very common throughout the world.
Absolutely.
We can look at the Aztec and the Mayan civilizations, and that was
Babylon,
going on in
Egypt, India.
Everywhere.
Massive sacrifices. When a pharaoh died, you bury all of his retinue with him, and that went on. The horse culture and the bull culture, where they'd just be. Rome was a bull culture where they murdered these beasts. Trying to take the strength from them into themselves, and believing that the spiritual force.
Again, it's sympathetic magic. Is what it is, and of course, since the Renaissance, we've kind of drifted away from that in our normed, educated society. The magician was very powerful in plays and all of that. The gods could be manipulated, in other words, until it ended really. After Shakespeare wrote the Tempest, which the magician Prospero bowed out at the end. He said, I put down my tools of my trade, and I go back to being human, to become the ruler of Milan or whatever. I refuse to be the magician. In a sense, Shakespeare is saying two things. Magic is okay on stage and in myths and in all of that, but you cannot take it off stage. It doesn't work, And if you look at Prospero in his in the play, he blew it as the ruler of Milan because he was this intellectual looking for knowledge, looking for ways to manipulate reality, become a great philosopher. And he wasn't a great ruler as a result. And as a result, he got banished, to the island. And then he did all these magical things on the island and solved all kinds of problems. But the main problem he solved was the fact that you have to be a lot more practical as a ruler. You can't use the magic of philosophy, the magic of science, or the magic of magic to run things. You've got to get real, and I think that's what the play is about. And it kind of puts an end in an artistic sense to this whole notion that we can use the power of magic, the power of prayer, the power of mantra to manipulate reality that we really need. This is, in my view, my interpretation of the Tempest is to get back to that ultimate humanity that we are in the best way we can, using science, using politics, using philosophy, blending it all that together, and not pretend that we are magicians.
And also historically in the context, the Tempest is written somewhere about 1611, 1612.
Yes.
And by this time, James I, who's come to the throne in 1603, he is the author of a book called Demonology and a great believer in magic and witchcraft. And his beliefs are beginning to fail towards the end of. There's an interview with one of the witch trials where he realizes that the material is fabricated, that they're just getting people. People are just saying hysterical things, And
right, yeah.
it
There was
made it
this character.
safe for Shakespeare to actually question this,
Yes,
because
it was.
James was, hanging, drawing, and quartering people who disagreed with him.
Right, but being Shakespeare, he did it so brilliantly. He did it
For me, it's
at
the
the level of
greatest
the.
Shakespeare plays. It's
He
incredible.
did it at the level of the street. You can understand a lot of the things that are going on, and at the highest levels of philosophical inquiry. When you look at that play, it's an incredible piece of work. I just reread a book I have about the magician in history throughout the Renaissance, and it ends with Prospero. The author looks at. Let me get the book here.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Because I kind of reread it after I did this video on Flynn and prayer and the Great Invocation. It's called the Heavenly Necromancers, the Magician in English Renaissance Drama, Barbara Howard Trader. So that's what the book looks like.
Yeah. So we'll all rush out and buy that.
Oh, yeah. It's very old. It's been out for quite a while. In fact, it came out in 1984. So it's not that old. But she brings out the fact that these magicians weren't all of a kind on stage, but they also reflected what was going on in society, that people were getting away from this idea that magic can work. There was that alchemist John Dee, who was one of the most famous of the alchemists.
Queen Elizabeth's court.
And he was also an inventor and quite a brilliant man in many ways. He invented this beetle bug thing that was on stage that looked like it was levitating, and as a result he got the reputation of being a real magician. He wasn't just David Copperfield, he was Moses, parting the sea. And that almost ruined him, because now he was saddled with this idea that he was a conjurer in the real sense, and he could use black magic. So it's a double-edged sword. If you can boil tea with the power of your mind and not having to turn on the stove, you can also boil somebody's brain, with the power of your mind. Now think about that.
Star Wars.
So if any of this magic really worked, or that kind of prayer worked, which Christian Science has shown us, it totally fails. To bring on the perfection of Christ in your mind, and that's going to heal people and cure you of everything, including death. Because they don't go to funerals because they don't believe that death is real. And
Mary Baker G. Eddy still walks among us.
I don't know what happened to her. She might have had a negative thought and failed. That's possible. And,
Mark Twain wrote a wonderful little book
he did.
about Christian Science.
Yeah, he in fact, he said, Mark Twain or Samuel Clemens, writing at the time, he felt that kind of religion, that kind of thinking, the idea of Norman Vincent Peale thinking and all of that, the New Thought movement, was going to ruin American society. And look at us right now. We have one of the strangest blends of magical thinking, and incredible technology and science in this country. We are a laughing stock of the world in one case when it comes to vaccines, and on the other hand, we have the potential to solve this pandemic problem with our incredible energy to produce the vaccines. So it's a very conflicted nation right now.
And just to interject on the point, you mentioned Norman Vincent Peale and the power of positive thinking, which has sold millions of copies. It's worth interjecting that Donald J. Trump, throughout his childhood, attended Norman Vincent Peale's church. And
yes.
Norman Vincent Peale was an advisor to Richard Nixon when Richard Nixon was very, very drunk one night and very angry. He phoned up Norman Vincent Peale and said, "Should I bomb Cambodia?" And Peale thought he should, given the power of positive thinking. And that went rather wrong. Down came the Khmer Rouge and Pol Pot out of this stupid idea. And there's something very essential to this, the idea that you can move the world with your mind, that your wishes can make things happen. So, I was in Scientology for 9 years, where you're given this word postulate. And a postulate is a basic philosophic premise. But L. Ron Hubbard liked to redefine words. He talked about, in fact, propaganda by the redefinition of words very loudly, and then did it. And so we were taught that as children, we would have called wishes were now postulates, and that if anything bad happened to you, that was your fault, and if anything good happened to you, you got this psychic power, and it runs through our society. The law of attraction, the secret, Nichiren Shosu, where you pray to your Gohonzon for
Nam-myoho Renge Kyo.
Exactly. And suddenly there's a Mercedes-Benz outside your house.
I almost had the Mercedes-Benz, but I ended up with a 1966 pickup truck.
Yes, exactly. It's just because your prayers weren't strong enough. And on the subject of prayer, of course, there have been some attempts to demonstrate the power of prayer, and they haven't. And a chap a few years ago wrote to New Scientist, and he said, well, the reason that these experiments failed is because I prayed they would. And nobody had thought about that.
Well, there's a famous song by Garth Brooks. And a line in it goes, I thank God for unanswered prayers. Because the story is that he fell in love when he was young with this woman, and then they broke up, and he met her 20 years later and realized that she was never going to be the woman he really wanted, and that he wasn't the guy for her. And he was thankful that he had the wife he had, but he would, when he was young, was praying to God, please let me have this woman, please let her love me. And, so it's like, the idea of the negative, that if you put wolfbane on your window, werewolves won't come in your house. Well, it works, right?
Yeah, but of course, if you happen to have grown up in the German culture, werewolves are considered to be positive. So you have to be very careful about that. Vampires are negative, and werewolves, I mean, the Nazis had the werewolves, these actual terrorist people who went out killing.
There you go. So I think that the thing is here is not so much in the mind of the person doing decrees like in theosophy or mantras in India, or the Christian praying. They absolve themselves of mistakes, and by putting this intermediary in there, which they call Jesus or God, or in India, we have our friend Ganesh, the elephant-headed god, the remover of obstacles, which is probably the most popular, other than Krishna, god in India. An interesting mythology behind this, which I don't want to get into here, but why he has an elephant head. He's a beloved deity, an incarnation of Vishnu.
You can tell he has an elephant head. We're curious.
Yeah. Well, the story goes that I think it's Shiva. Shakti and Shiva are male-female counterparts. Anyway, one of the female gods had this child, and its head was cut off. And the story goes that the god allowed them to replace its head with the first creature that came by, and it happened to be an elephant, so they put the elephant head on it. I mean, it's irrational, but that's the way myths are, And then you, like Joseph Campbell did, go into the depths of it and looking for some kind of Jungian reason why it happened, But anyway, he got his head
until he lost faith with Jung.
The kid was decapitated and then got the elephant head because of a trick of coincidence, And I don't know if why, but it's always been one of the favorite gods, and you see it. For instance, Ganesh's picture is pictured on every bus driver's dashboard over there when I was over there.
Like
so the idea,
having something that has this magical power somehow that will protect you or advantage.
Yeah. So the person can say, it's not me that's choosing whether it's going to happen or not. It's Ganesh. I leave it up to the god. All I do is pay my obeisances and do my sacrifices and do my prayers. I do my part. But when you pull back from that and see it's really your will focused through that particular god, be it Jesus or Ganesh, in order to do what's in your head, what's right. That's what you want to see, And so if the outcome isn't what you really want, like for instance, all the prayers that were set up, for Donald Trump to win the election, it didn't happen. Well, they had to find another reason for that, because they, having God within, couldn't fail, and so there must be some other reason. So now God is saying, well, then it must be up to you. You know, I find it in my heart that I have to take over the government. God's sending me as a soldier, you know, to go do it. So that's the next step. Usually when God seems to fail, that you take the reins of power and use bombs and guns and whatever it is you need, you know, in order to fulfill the magic that didn't seem to work. You know, I think that's part of the problem with that kind of belief system, in imposing your will onto a God when you're saying it's really the God's will that's doing it. But what is this thing? It's, you know, even in the Bible, it says this is just a piece of wood. What can it do for you? You know, Muhammad was great at saying this. You know, why do you believe in these things? These are just stone.
Yeah.
You know, he was an iconoclast. He did away with all those images.
Yeah.
So anyway, we could go on with that, but that's basically what the video was about, was discussing this, in my view, mistaken idea that this kind of overvalued prayer, that overvalued casting of spells and overvalued notions of our connection with gods and cosmic powers works, because it doesn't.
And I'd separate out the idea of a spell and a prayer. And I think that it is a terrible, you know, I'm an agnostic, okay, but I still believe that prayer can be very useful to people. But invocations and spells and trying to control spiritual forces, I think is dangerous, whichever way you look at it. To pray and to say, God, you know, look after my mum and dad, you know, look after my friends, you know, if you look at the Lord's Prayer, you know, that you're going to forgive everyone.
Right.
Now, that forgiveness is no part of these invocations, these spells. These spells are ways of harming other people.
It's actually I think it's an extension of Nietzsche's will to power. And Schopenhauer, the idea, you know, and social Darwinism is that we have to will, you know, Ayn Rand, we have to will our energy into being and take reality by the horns and like the bull and control it. You know, this is that part of that hyper masculine chauvinistic reality of people. And, you know, it's useful in society to have that aspect, you know, especially, you know, if you're going to fight a war, you need people that believe in that kind of thing, or else they're not going to fight very well.
They have to believe in something. But with
right.
Nietzsche, because the most famous statement that Nietzsche made, and most people don't realize he made it, it's so often repeated, is what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. And this is one of the most ridiculous affirmations ever. By beating your children, you are strengthening them. And in Nietzsche's case, of course, it would be true to say that what didn't kill him drove him completely mad, that he spent the last 50 years of his life in a mental institute. He also, of course, I was told this in Denmark. I was staying with some Christians there who'd noticed that there was this weekly newspaper, and somebody kept putting this ad in it saying, "God is dead, Nietzsche." And eventually some wag put, "Nietzsche is dead, God." And, you know, social Darwinism, that's something that fascinates me. The idea that Herbert Spencer comes along and says that it's about the survival of the fittest. And originally Darwin says, I don't really like that formulation. And then he capitulates to it. And it is such a tautology. That which survives is fitted to survive. That's taken by the Nazis and others to mean that brutality and force is what helps you to survive. Well, the giraffe didn't survive because of brutality and force. It survived because it could get the leaves at the top of the tree. It was fitted to doing that particular thing. And that misapprehension gave us horrors through the 20th century. And it's not really a proper formulation of natural selection.
You know, the other thing I bring up, like this book by Gad Saad, The Parasitic Mind, which I read recently, he has a passage in there about the honey badger, and his idea, he's kind of like right of center. And he picks a lot of low-hanging fruit, picking on liberal ideas that are really bad, you know, and how silly they are, which is, you know, I do with that myself. So do you. Yep. But he makes a big deal out of it, and he gets a lot of press on YouTube or whatever, you know, because this is his kind of assault on postmodernism and you know, these people that can't make up their mind about anything, and he has a passage in his book about the honey badger, and he said that we should be like honey badgers. When somebody criticizes us and they're completely wrong, go back at them. Don't stop until they cower. Because honey badgers never give up. They'll even take on a pride of lions.
Oh, absolutely. Lions keep away from them because.
However, what he's missing is this: even honey badgers can be manipulated by some of the weakest things around. Yeah. Bees and honey. You can distract them quite easily, from any kind of attack by just, misdirection.
Well, and of course they're controlled in their behavior. I don't remember the name of the bird that they follow, but they're led to.
They do that too, yeah.
And they share it with the bird.
So the metaphor that doesn't really work very well when you stretch it out. Being a honey badger is not that useful because one, they're very aggressive, but they're not as agile as some creatures are. Like, let's say a mongoose would just take off. If a pride of lions, why fight them?
Yeah, why go to the trouble? And the idea of being belligerent in all circumstances, rather than looking to the future and the consequences of your actions, is stupid. There's no intelligence. And again, if you're going to persuade somebody of something, smacking them about the head is usually not the best way. Having a conversation, finding out what it is they understand and what they know, and bringing about a willingness to share information, which honey badgers don't tend to do, that you can actually change somebody's mind that way, and you can help them to change their behavior, which I believe only, I've been in a few honey badger fights over the years with people.
Right. It's a lot of fun to get into an argument, and I've done it myself, and it's been done to me where I point out something that's wrong and just hammer it home, and then the person feels totally embarrassed.
Yeah.
But that's really not the way to communicate these things, and it's basically the Socratic method is to allow them to realize it for themselves by offering information as they can handle it, and this is exactly what exit counseling used to be about. You go for 10-hour days for 3-4 days in a row on average, and you work a topic, you work through it, you give and take, and watch the person come to their own realizations. Maybe not in the way you would have done it, but you see changes going on in front of you. In these kinds of give and take conversations, but they take a long time. They take a lot of sensitivity. They take patience.
Yes.
You also sometimes have to sit back and bite your tongue because you're being insulted by the person that you're trying to help. But yeah, the honey badger thing to me is makes good press and makes the skeptic feel energized and victorious.
It appeals to the animal part of the human being. As we mentioned Muhammad before, and he said that we're a composite of beasts and angels, and the more angelic way to do things is to bring about cooperation, collaboration through understanding and consensus.
Yeah, and what you're bringing up is what W.R. Bion called the working group. The working group risks looking at things and having to say, well, I might be wrong about that, or I'm willing to give in because I can see that you need more of this than I do. And it's a very difficult arena for human beings to be in, but most successful corporations, successful boardrooms, successful city councils have that quality. They have disparate points of view, but they can suspend their basic assumptions, whatever it is, whether it's agnosticism or atheism or theism, if you want to look at three things, and move into a working state and come to some practical way of building a road, or solving a race problem in a school or whatever it might be. This takes work, and I think most of society likes to do that. But when it comes to power, military and politics, we lose that ability. It's about winning. It's about getting votes. It's about identity. If our team loses, we have to create a civil war to get the win. We can't just talk about it.
Yeah. And there are so many situations where it would have been possible to have some kind of discussion, and where that doesn't happen, then you get carnage. So the American Civil War, 600,000 deaths, and
it was awful. It was brutal.
It was the first modern war. It was the first war that left massive psychological trauma after it. In fact, it's where companies like Eli Lilly, the patent medicine companies, made their big start. It's where public relations start, because there were so many millions of people who were traumatized. So Eli Lilly and other drug companies were selling mixtures of alcohol, opium, and cannabis. Massive swathes of this going out to just basically addict people and get them to be able to deal with the trauma of living, that living had become traumatic. The echoes of that war are still there. The Confederate battle flag, not actually the Confederate flag, which I don't think many Americans would recognize if they saw it, but the Confederate battle flag, which differs from the Stars and Stripes, so could be used in battle, is still being waved by people who don't really understand that this is a polarization. This is a drawing of battle lines and saying we're against that. And when you get into conversation, and it happens on both sides, whether I find myself talking to, somebody who believes that Obama deserved the Nobel Peace Prize, for example, when a week later he sent 30,000 troops into Afghanistan. For me, there's a little bit of conflict where, drone strikes were taking place, which, as far as I'm concerned, are war crimes, where Guantanamo Bay was still running. So somebody accused me of pimping Biden a couple of days ago on channel. It's like, I've never pimped anybody or anything in my life, but I've said rude things about every president since FDR.
That's okay. You don't have to absolve yourself. You're good.
Yeah, but I've also said positive things about them, and that brings us to Benjamin Franklin, who put out this idea that you draw a line down a piece of paper, you've got pros and cons, and then you put down what those are in a situation, then you give a value to each of these, you add up the numbers, and you've got some kind of formula. And with me, when people were sort of ardently pro-Trump or ardently anti-Trump, while the first election was taking place, I'd say, get the piece of paper, write this down. The trick was simple. The trick was, if you've only got material on one side of the page, you've overbalanced. Even when we talk about Hitler, who was an absolute monster, he did build one of the best road systems in Europe. He did rescue the economy. So there are things on the pro side. The point is that it loses by about 100 to 1. But if you don't have any positive or any negative feelings about another human being, then it's likely that you need to reconsider your position. And by dialogue and by the collecting of evidence, rather than the collecting of whatever's just gone viral on YouTube, which hopefully this will, the collection of evidence and the discussion of evidence and the willingness to debate without calling names, without raging, like Jordan Peterson calling people weasels, for example.
Ridiculous. It sounds like old Imus in the morning. Don Imus was a shock jock who used that word weasel a lot. And I thought about this. You brought up the Civil War, which, we're still living with the post-traumatic stress in the United States of that, and it affects a lot of the world. But what if we did a thought experiment, and this came up just this past week in my mind. I go, what if the South won? How could have they won? Let's say they got the support of England and the people that wanted their cheap cotton. because cheap cotton was a big part of this whole
and the
argument.
negotiation was going on to exactly that effect historically.
But what if they had won and we had another nation? Now, would the institution of slavery still exist, let's say 20 or 30 years after they had won? Or would they have had to succumb to pressure because so many other countries had disowned slavery by then?
Even Russia.
Right. So would we have a similar country that we have now anyway? Because they would have had to rely on the industrial North to keep things going, which, a lot of the industry was there. They would have kept that in place. They would have had to make some accommodations, being the new rulers, for the needs of the North, or else the war would never end and you would never get anywhere. Germany, by finally succumbing and surrendering, became the greatest nation in Europe again. Rebuilding. They rebuilt twice, after the first war and after the second, and they did an incredible job both times, just from that perspective of technology and rebuilding a culture.
And it's I think it's worth saying that when Donald Trump was saying "Make America Great Again," I think there were quite a lot of us that said, "When is he talking about? What is the?"
We don't know. Yeah.
And the only place I can go with that is probably the Marshall Plan after the Second War, which had running alongside it the CIA's filthy tricks. But the Marshall Plan, the idea of reinvigorating Europe, though sadly not Britain, because Britain had a socialist government, so was only given half of the money it needed. But German industry and indeed Japanese industry were rebuilt through the generosity of America. And that is the greatness for me of America, where that generous spirit has been shown.
Well, it was in the cause of maintaining a peace by having these countries thrive, which is what they wanted in the beginning anyway.
To try and stop their former ally, the Soviet Union, and Uncle Joe. Right. And around we go.
But you think about even the slogan, which I don't know if it was thought out this deeply, but the MAGA slogan, "Make America Great Again." The word "make" is coercive. It's not, doesn't just mean create, but it means that the pot is now molding, not the creator. It has something to do with that same social Darwinist will to power, and it appeals. Make America great again. And if you don't like the way we're making it, we're going to make you make America great again. This is where it falls apart. It's a coercive slogan.
Yes.
And it's not just like the steel industry making a better form of steel, which is one way you can look at that. But it seems to have translated more into this will to power idea. And if you see the rallies, that's exactly what you see. You don't see the working together, the working group. You see a coercive group yelling and wanting to defeat the communists that are going to take over the nation or that have taken over our universities. That's the kind of mentality you have within that mindset. And
it's a battle that's been fought certainly for more than a century now in the US. Sacco and Vanzetti along the way, the anti-communist fervor that before the First World War, you have the corporations sort of going, we've got to stop trade unions. And Studs Terkel was the great radio presenter, said he was stood at a bus stop listening to two yuppies talking about how dreadful socialism was. And he turned to them, he said, "How many hours do you work a week?" And they said, "Well, about 40. And he said, "You do realize that's a consequence of the trade union movement, don't you? That had capitalism persisted without any pushback from the working people, then the conditions would have remained pretty much as they were in the 19th century, which was to say a 12-hour working day, 5 days a week, half a day on Saturday. That was quite normal. People were being
But John, think about our situation now in the United States. We have the 40-hour week as full-time standard, right? And most companies have to adhere by that. But most Americans don't do that. They try to put in overtime. They try to have a second job. They moonlight because the economy has depressed so much, and the whole Walmartism of American economics, where you hire mostly part-time workers in order to sell cheaper products, in order to sell more. You know, the owners make a lot more money because of this cheap product thing, but as a result, the workers don't make as much money, and they're working as many hours because they got 2 or 3 part-time jobs. So the whole power structure made an end run around these union gains when you think about it.
Well, in the unions
and we're back to where we were, working 12, 14, 15 hours a day in many cases.
The unions became corrupt.
Well, they became corrupt, like Bob Dylan said. You know, the unions were a good idea, but greed got in the way.
And then you get the idea of, rather than using modern technology and automating, as say Fiat did in the 1970s in Italy, you use special economic zones or slave states, and so there are no jobs anymore, and you have this collapse of the economy through.
We're in really strange times, but it's obviously the people in power pull the strings, and it doesn't matter Democrat, Republican, we still have the same problem.
Yes.
And I think most people know that. They're frustrated. I think that conservative aspect in America that's really frustrated feels that, and they call it the deep state, they call it, you know, the oligarchy, but what they don't understand is, by feeding into the arrogance of someone like Trump and his family and all of that kind of thinking, they're actually cutting their own economic throat in the long run, because they're still going to be working for cheap wages. They're still going to be struggling to get proper housing and education. They're still going to be struggling to get proper health care and all of that. They might have their guy in power, but so what?
And I think a fundamental problem from George Washington onward, and I said I was just criticizing presidents from FDR, but now I'm getting back to George Washington, is that the United States is a plutocracy. Rather than having a monarch who's running things, and that's a dreadful thing, the idea of inherited power, you have a rich person running things and a group of rich people. And to make a president, it now costs, I think I was reading that Trump paid for 5.9 million advertisements on Facebook alone, whereas Hillary Clinton had something like 60,000. Not a Hillary Clinton fan either. Let's just put it on the record, not pimping anybody here. What's happened is you've got two power lobbies fighting each other rather than representing the needs of the people, and which is what America was, it's Abe Lincoln's famous declaration, by the people.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's an ideal, obviously.
But we've got no closer to it. That's the problem. That it's still. No. I learned this word the other year, cacocracy, which you can spell with C's or K's, which makes it exceptional. Wonderful. Which is the rule of the worst. And I think that our world has very frequently picked on the worst. And for me, the worst is authoritarianism. The way you pick some bully who believes that he or she should have power, is invested by God or something, and they should be in charge because they know what to do. When Trump sat down with the generals and told them that he knew more about military strategy than they did. And when you actually see interviews with some of those generals, these guys are really smart. I don't necessarily approve of their livelihood, but they really do understand tactics and how you do this. Stanley McChrystal, for example, who is incredible in interview. He's such a smart guy. I'm at the moment, I'm not pimping anything here, by the way, but I am recommending this particular book by Ruth Ben-Ghiat, Strongmen. Okay. And she is an expert on Mussolini and Italy, who then looks at Gaddafi, Hitler, Idi Amin, and comes right up to Trump through Berlusconi, and shows the common attitudes between them, the misogyny, the violence.
I wonder what she says. I'd like to see the book sometime, but when you think about this, any corporate entity or polis that needs to be governed, because that you have to submit to something that enforces the rule of law, for instance, because you cannot have the inmates running the asylum. It does get crazier.
Well, you
if
should
you allow
not.
anarchy.
You know, we had
What's
Boris
that?
Johnson this week telling
Well,
the
that's the problem. Is sometimes the inmate becomes the ruler.
That Kermit was being rude to Miss Piggy. He's obviously not even understood the Muppets, let alone anything else. But but I would say the rule of law, I would replace that with the rule of justice. That a society is founded upon justice, and that corruption and nepotism and simony, these ways of spreading power for your own family and your own cronies, are the death of civilization. And that I'm very hopeful. I do think that we are intelligent enough to take hold, to take control, to take back control, as we were told, to leave the European Union with the greatest.
But even if we're not intelligent enough, I think the basic human being is selfish enough to realize when they might be cutting their own throat by being too greedy, or not looking out for their neighbor. You know, that at some point, even the dullest people can see that it benefits them to benefit someone else. You know, the golden rule. I mean, that without that, the society will utterly fail. That has to be a basic principle, I think, in most people for any society to work. And I think that gets undermined sometimes because the neighbor gets vilified. The other becomes vilified to the extent that you have to eradicate them or dispense their existence, as Lifton says.
Lifton says, yeah.
Which he says is the primary definition of a closed system or a cult. Yeah. How they dispense existence. Yeah. You know, and I don't know, how much time do we have left here, John? We've been moving along pretty well here.
The end is nigh. I think that, you know, for me, finally, that the point is realizing, as I've been saying for years, and I'm not the only one, that there are human predators among us. Indeed, Donald Trump said this. He told Tony Schwartz, who wrote The Art of the Deal for him, that people are either predators or prey. And there are indeed human predators among us, but they make up a tiny amount. Robert Hare, the great expert on psychopath, he says probably about 2% of people, 3% of men, 1% of women are psychopaths. They are, they will do whatever they care to do. By recognizing these people and not supporting them, we can change the world. We can change the way that we behave towards each other and not have our passions inflamed to destroy one another.
The mask of sanity.
Yeah. Back to the beginning.
Oh, this is Harvey Cleckley. I'm sorry. Harvey Cleckley's version of this. But he also brought this up a long time ago. He calls it the mask of sanity, analyzing the psychopath.
Cleckley's work was a good beginning back in the 1940s.
Yeah, but this would help me understand this when I first began looking at this. But I agree, Hare is much more clear about the whole thing.
But I think Snakes in Suits, which is not an exceptionally well written book, because they try to write this story through it, but it nonetheless is a very good book about the psychopath, or his pupil Kent Keel, the psychopath whisperer. Okay. And you evidence there, you're shown, but you also, there's this other contradiction that you have the pro-social sociopath, and James Fallon, The Psychopath Inside, I think the book is called. Understanding these sort of people, and then here I am going to seek to sell something that I talk about this in my own book, Opening Our Minds, and throw away all of the psychiatric diagnoses, the Machiavellian personality, the malignant narcissist, all of this stuff, and say there are people who are predatory and they can easily be recognized. And in fact, we should have a link to a free poster that you can stick on your refrigerator. And it's just a single page that says, if you see these characteristics in somebody, they are authoritarians, they're bullies, they're people who will screw your life up for their own advantage.
Right.
at the extreme, they become the strongmen that Ruth Ben-Ghiat talks about. So
let me finish up just by saying, make this clear about this power of prayer. We'll use Ganesh again here. If the bus driver in India has a picture of Ganesh there and he's praying, the bus driver is not going to let go of the steering wheel and let Ganesh drive. So that idea is what I'd like to leave us with, is that okay, the idea of the God protecting you can help you to maybe focus a little better and be a little better, be like Ganesh, to remove the obstacles, but you're not going to let go of the steering wheel. I think I think that's what a lot of these positive thinking type of things, when they become overvalued, they actually let go of the steering wheel. They want to pretend that health is going to come, that wealth is going to come, that peace is going to come, that a bad marriage is going to be solved by putting affirmations on the refrigerator or whatever. It can become overvalued, and that's where my problem is with it. Okay, put your Ganesh on there, but keep your hands on the steering wheel.
Yeah, so that's our summation for this conversation. Keep your hands on the wheel and your eyes on the road.
On the road. Okay.
Don't dilly-dally on the way.
Okay, thank you, John.
Thank you so much, Joe. Joe's in Hart. I'm John Atack. Thank you for your time and attention, and
enjoyed it.
Hands on the steering wheel. Thanks.
Take it easy, John. Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Hi, John here. Thanks for watching. We'd appreciate it very much if you would click like, as well as subscribe, and click the bell for notifications. Every dollar helps, and we welcome new patrons on Patreon, or you can make a one-off payment with any currency through PayPal. Thanks so much.